Stefan promised me that I would be able to say a few words, otherwise I wouldn't have come. But first of all, I want to tell you how honored I am to be here. I just wrote a few things down. It won't take but a few minutes. But I have a story I want to share with you. First of all, thank you for coming. This is an honor I never would have dreamt about. It happened. I can't tell Stefan. I just can't handle this. Just take that name off that. You can just say it's a great idea and you love your dad, but he put my name on it, and I do feel so honored. And I want to thank everybody who's a part of this. I want to thank Melissa, especially his partner, his wonderful wife. And I want to thank the staff of the medical center who are just so terrific. You know, I think about it, I say, now wait a minute, where could Stefan possibly be the kind of person he is and still exist? Well, he'd have to be surrounded with the kind of staff he has. I mean, he's outgoing, he's honest, he bears his soul all the time, and you get what you're looking at. And there he is, and of course, the staff reinforces that because they're that kind of person themselves, each and every one of them. So thank you for doing all that you're doing. First of all, just two little things. One is, Stefan mentioned about Reston, Virginia, that he was born in Reston, Virginia. Well, thank you to the Virginia Supreme Court for allowing us to be in Virginia in the summer of 1967. They overturned, the Supreme Court did, all these laws against what they called, I don't know if you remember this word, but they called it miscegenation. Sometimes we call it interracial marriage, sometimes we call it mixed marriage, but his mother and I got married in Minneapolis, Minnesota in 1965. So we didn't have to defy the law there. Certainly if we'd been married in Hawaii, we wouldn't have had to defy it. But then we moved back to Florida because I still had a year of graduate school to finish. So we lived in Gainesville defying the law, but we had an advantage. Mary had grown up there. Her father was a minister. I had been an activist student at the University of Florida, was already well known, and we didn't sit by idly when injustices were committed, and certainly we weren't going to be the kind of people that the sheriff or the police chief, who did some research, by the way, we heard from the voter registrar, the police chief, when he wanted an official record. He wanted to make sure I was white. So he saw that my voter registration was under white. And that my wife, Mary, was under Negro. And of course, that was grounds for arrest. But somebody must have told him, now wait a minute, you might be doing something you're definitely going to regret, putting these two people in jail in Gainesville, Florida, even though it's 1965. So he passed on that. However, we still realized that once I finished school, we needed to have a place to live. So we wound up, the closest we could be to our home in Florida was Washington, D.C. That was our first legal stop. So that's where we spent, and then we arrived in the summer of '66. But in '67, the Supreme Court overturned the Virginia law against this, and of course it caused all the states to have to follow along. Some of you might remember it, by the way, it was called the Loving case. This interracial couple were called the Lovings. So they overturned that, and now we could move, leaving Washington, D.C., which was the inner city. We loved it, but we had young children. Stefan wasn't born yet. So we went to Reston, Virginia, and of course that's why Reston, Virginia became our home. A very integrated community. As I tell my son sometimes, to remind the environment we had, we were so lucky. Back at the time, Washington, D.C., of course, had all these people who could now legally come out of the city and move to the suburbs, and Reston, Virginia was a welcoming place. So the average income of the black families in Reston, Virginia at that time was higher than the white families. So we were in as high a status place as you might imagine. And of course, we may have lived there longer than it turned out, but we did wind up back in Gainesville, Florida. And so then Now I'm going to skip to the last part, and that is Stefan's 16 years old. He's a junior in high school. This is 1989. And we have, as he mentioned, the word poverty. I guess I never thought of it as poverty. I just thought of it as, we just didn't have a lot of money. I was a school teacher. School teachers know we never had a lot of money. We had bought the house and then fixed it up. We all had some carpentry skills. The house we bought was $15,000, so it was affordable. We still had a mortgage, of course, but it was only $100 a month. But again, we worked hard on it. But this community was in southeast Gainesville. Gainesville's divided into 4 quadrants. And the quadrant we lived in was the smallest. But because it was a mostly African-American neighborhood, but it was also the smallest quadrant, when the city of Gainesville decided to locate social services, they always put them in southeast Gainesville. Why not? So we had the 2 homeless centers in Gainesville. And now all of a sudden they were going to take an apartment complex across the street from our house, evict the African-American families who were living there, and make it a one-stop social center for all the homeless people. And we said, well, that's nice. We need facilities for homeless, but why are you doing this to southeast Gainesville again? We're as much a neighborhood as anyone else. We just don't have a lot of money. So I actually got on the agenda of the city commission. It was almost a done deal, and we had a real hard struggle ahead of us. So we went before the city commission, and they were engaged in just waiting on the check to turn this complex of African-American families, let them leave, and move in. So now we have all the, it was such a convenient place, have all the homeless centers in the same place. So we went before the city commission, and I said, you know, Stefan, maybe there's something you can do. He's 16 years old, he's a junior in high school. I said, I'm going next week to the city commission, and I want to propose to them that maybe we can wake them up a bit about this center of this idea of putting all the social services in only one neighborhood. We need to spread them out. So we made a bar graph. And the bar for Southeast Gainesville was at the top of the chart. Very simple bar graph. Our opposition was the Alachua County Housing Authority. And they hired all the graduate students to put all the statistics together. And they were ready to let the city of Gainesville know that, no, this was the proper place to put another social service center. Put them all in one place. That's the best thing to do. So here we make the presentation. And it's a 5-member city commission. And I'm going to call it charisma because Stefan certainly presented it that night. He showed those 5 city commissioners with the audience his bar graph. And he said, now this is where we live. We live in southeast Gainesville. And you can see the bar is 3 times as high as any other bar. And maybe these bars ought to be equal. Maybe you ought to spread these things out. And then I gave a little more about how our neighborhood is organized. We had over 400 names that the African-American churches had presented to us who were in that southeast Gainesville. And they kind of looked at us. But there was all of a sudden, we didn't know what was going to happen next. So now the experts came on. Gail Monahan was her name. Well, Gail Monahan didn't know that Stefan already had presented. So Gail gets up there. She's chair of the Alachua County Housing Authority. And just as she gets started, one of our city commissioners, who's African American, she said, wait a minute, Gail, let me interrupt you right here. I don't think we need to hear anything more about all these charts you have and all the experts you brought here. We've already heard from Stefan. And they took a vote. And sure enough, they reversed the very thing that they were going to do and said, let's study this again. Let's look at southeast Gainesville as an emerging neighborhood. And now, by the way, this apartment complex we saved, which was called the Coy Thomas Apartments, is now called Cottages at Depot Park. And the neighborhood has done a resurgence, and all I can say is, and maybe it's a little longer than needed to be, but I can tell you this, Stefan's been at this for a long time, And he already assisted me. So I don't know why I get my name on this, because I got to start putting his name on some things too. And thank you very much, Stefan. That's wonderful to do that.
So now you know. Now you know why it's named the Dan Harmeling Medical and Wellness Center. And I would like to think that even if that man was not my father, I would follow his example, I'd be impressed with his commitment, and I would still name the medical center after him. Absolutely.